We cut through the partisan talking points. We're not interested in perpetuating fear. We're interested in seeking truth, hearing what's really going on America's borderland. And those who don't know, he's out of Pinal County, and Pinal County is not necessarily what you would say a quote unquote border town, right, but it tends to be a border almost spillover or almost direct from the border to the Pinal County. When did you, as a officer in Pinal County, start to identify those two, or has that always been known in the Pinal County area that you get a lot of border kind of spillover?
It's always kind of been known because if you look geographically at our county on a map, our county is basically right in between Tucson and Phoenix. And so if you go from one to the other, you go right through our county. But the southwest portion of our county, where we have a lot of cartel activity, or the most heavy cartel activity, that area has always sat just north of open desert all the way down to the U.S.-Mexico border. And it's open desert because a lot of it is reservation. It's the Tohono O'odham Reservation, and it's actually one of the reservation, or the only reservation that crosses international boundaries. So it's not only a reservation on the U.S. side, but on the Mexico side. And so that reservation in particular, they have access to both sides. And so it's just wide open desert all the way up. And we're actually the only agency in the U.S. If you're a border county, so if you're a sheriff's office on the border, you receive tier 1 funding from Border Patrol to help with those issues. We're the only county in the country that actually receives tier 1 funding as a tier 2 county, because our problem looks a lot like those counties that are right up against the border.
Right. You mentioned the Indian reservation, which is a really fascinating side of this, and I might eventually bring in an expert of that. But how much does that come into play, and how difficult is it to navigate as a law enforcement officer who doesn't have jurisdiction on an Indian reservation?
It's very difficult because it's a sovereign nation, right? And so for us in law enforcement to navigate that as just a U.S. cop, and let's just say in general, let's not say cartel stuff, right? Just in general, there's a lot of nuances to it, because if I'm a cop in my county and I'm working, I can stop people on the reservation, but I can't stop natives. And of course, you can't distinguish that until you're in the middle of it. And typically speaking, if I'm going to be doing work on the reservation, like if I'm going to go down there and I'm going to do a traffic stop, you have the respect to let that nation know, like, hey, I'm going to be in your area working, and you do your work. But if you stop natives, it's kind of hands off, like, oh, sorry, didn't know, and be on your way, because the tribal cops are the ones that have to interact with them. So there's a lot of nuances to it. So we tend to not do enforcement stuff down there because, again, we're kind of stepping on toes. There's jurisdictional issues. There's a whole bunch of issues. And then, if I'm going to be honest about it, the cartel's not dumb. And so they marry into those nations. They embed themselves into those Indian reservations, and they use that as cover a lot of times.
Yeah, when I worked in the prison system out there in Florence, Arizona, right next door to the Pinal County holding prison, there was a lot of natives who were incarcerated for smuggling dope. They got involved into the dope smuggling because of the challenges of law enforcement even managing that. Since it crosses the border, Border Patrol themselves still have to ask permission, have permission to work certain areas. And so they've been able to almost have a loophole there. The cartel knows that and exploits that. And unfortunately, some of the young kids in the native, the reservations, they fall victim to it. And then all of a sudden now they're smuggling, 8,000 pounds, whatever it is, of dope, of something. And then once they exit the confines of the reservation, well, then now they're available to get, pulled over by anyone, right. And then there's intel, there's whatever it is, even if you're just shotgunning traffic, and the fact that you see a vehicle that looks suspicious, well, now they get arrested for smuggling dope, and now they're put in prison, and that becomes a whole different, that's a federal case. It becomes, so there's a lot of complexities to that.
Yeah.
And people who don't know the Indian reservations, they have their own police officers. Sometimes they have their own prisons, and they manage their own little world. And so the fact that that area is very specific to Pinal County, that's why I mention it. It's part of the complexities of your area and how to manage kind of the drugs, the cartel, and even illegal smuggling of individuals.
Yeah, and I think people really don't understand reservations unless they've worked with them or on them, because they have their own, essentially what equates to our White House, our Washington, D.C., right? So the Tohono O'odham tribe has their central hub for their government. And so when you go down there to visit, it's like you're visiting another nation. And so there's a lot of nuances, and you have to develop good relationships with them. And so luckily for us, we have a great relationship. Our sheriff, is very good at managing all of that, as am I over time. I've developed relationships. And so we work well with them. And they're taxed down there too, man. So when you talk about law enforcement, our county's 5,400 square miles, so we have a big area and not a lot of people to cover it. They're a little bit bigger, and they have less staff to cover it. So not a lot of law enforcement presence down there.
Yeah, one of my buddies from the prison I worked at, he actually applied for them and got hired on with them many years ago. And when we connect after, he explained like the challenges of working there and also not being native.
Right.
That even made it harder.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, dude. And I can tell you, I'm a white guy, and there's a disdain by some of those natives on that reservation for white cops. They just don't like you. They don't like you on their reservation, and they feel that we shouldn't be there.
Yeah, I worked at the Salt Pima reservation I was working as like kind of like what is it? I was like an intern for a fire department. I was working to try and it was like we worked there for 3 weeks trying to get them to know us, and hopefully when the hiring process comes out, so I learned a lot of working on a reservation, what that looks like. And one of my best friends worked on a reservation currently. So yeah, man, it's a challenge.